we heard Mr. McCool that there were 111 travel trailers that were provided today. Some 16 remain. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
You brought in some 250 people to help, and I know they're not all into the trailers, but they're into removing dangerous items, preparing long-term planning, each of those things. It seems like to me that some of the rules and regulations related to that could be streamlined. I think you've agreed to look at some of these things, but I'm interested in what Mr. Edwards said about this report, what might be an after-action or a mid-action report. I believe that you at FEMA are the lead on behalf of the efforts that go on here. Is that correct?
For the temporary housing mission? Yes,
No, sir, I'm sorry. Let me go back. Got the housing. Is there a lead for the federal government from Article 2, which are these agencies? Is there a lead person who is in charge of or was in charge of coming down and coordinating the response on behalf of the federal government?
Sir, I was the federal coordinating officer, and my responsibility is to lead the response and coordinate recovery efforts, so that would be me.
And this is what I'm suggesting. So, in my opinion, FEMA, you would be that lead coordinator.
Yes, sir.
That means that you would be responsible with some sort of a battle plan, so to speak. You would coordinate with SBA, you'd coordinate with HUD, you'd understand these other agencies that were involved.
Yes, sir.
And you believe that that response that you've got may or may not exist, that report, and it may or may not have gone to Congress?
I don't know if it's gone to Congress, sir. I will check and get back to you for the record.
But one exists. This overall plan, FEMA as the lead is responsible for the coordination. That would tell me that FEMA, the coordinator, was aware of circumstances, the need, the result, the interaction, the moving the government towards their answers across the board. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. We have incident strategic plans that cover all federal actions.
Yes, sir. Well, you mentioned you had some 4,000 people that could be providing feedback, but does it come to a point where there's a lead coordinator within FEMA, presumptively you? Does that move upstream to where there's a list of the needs, of the priorities, of the advancement towards those goals? Is that ever coordinated, or
Oh, yes,
is
sir.
everybody on their own?
Oh, no, sir, on a daily basis. We have unified coordination group meetings, and we set objectives, priorities, and we track them, and we follow them. We have metrics to them, and we do that since day one of this disaster, and we do that for all of our disasters.
Okay. So in that coordination, was there conversation with your key partners about looking at this disaster? I know we've said a hurricane's kind of a hurricane, and yet there are particulars because of the people or the locations. Is there conversation about CDBG money and its impact on this island and following the law or discretion that may be necessary of the total amount of money, housing versus businesses? Was that ever in the conversation, and what is your thinking there? The reason why I say this, because I come from the business community in my background, And the business community has to have businesses back up if they're going to provide what could be revenue to the city or to the organization to make sure it continues. What was your evaluation as the lead of this group of trying to coordinate that recommendation versus the guidelines?
All of the agencies that I mentioned, to include HUD and SBA, were mission assigned, and in our joint field office, along with the state of Florida, Florida Department of Emergency Management, and they are still there to this day, up in Lake Mary as well as down here, right up the road. And we coordinate on a weekly basis in terms of priorities, in terms of what you need, what we could do, what you could possibly do. That coordination is ongoing.
What is your evaluation, any of the three of you, on that recommendation for getting the money and handing it out versus what might be affordable housing, what might be SBA loans, which might be actually to look at the island, to look at this area and say, here its real needs. Is there an impediment to that process? Is there an impediment to that outcome? Or do you have the ability to come in and say, we're going to have to spend more money on businesses as opposed to affordable housing because of the particular circumstance here?
We work close. Do you want to take that?
Sure.
If I may, sir, in Washington, we're not making the decisions about how the funds are used locally, and it's not even the federal government with our counterparts in Florida. With the CDBG funds, the state or the counties that have been allocated the funds go through a local planning process. So in allocating the funds to them, we use data from FEMA and from the Small Business Administration about uninsured losses. But ultimately, those decisions are made by the state and the county leadership.
So you're suggesting to me, very directly, that that money would come, what we might call local money, federal money that would come. Do you place restrictions or rules and regulations on those?
It's federal money, so of course we do, because
Okay.
we need to ensure compliance with all the laws and the regulations. We are transparent in the data that we use in allocating, and we say, essentially, this is how much housing need we think you have, how much small business need, and how much infrastructure need.
So there's a recommendation.
And if you want to use it differently, come and talk to us. Show us how your local needs are different from what the federal data reflects.
Is that within the discretion or a waiver that we spoke about in the beginning?
Depending on the unique circumstance, but we routinely see communities spending their money moving amongst the pots differently from how we initially did the allocation.
Would that be up to a county to make that decision? Would that be up to a state to make that decision?
In Florida, it would be either, because we made allocations to the state as well as to multiple counties. So whoever has the direct relationship with HUD is the decision maker about how to do that plan. Once they make the plan, they can amend the plan as well. They're not held to it.
Have they sought some of these waivers that you have not approved?
Unfortunately, we're just at the starting gate now with the money, so there are 2 plans out for public review. Nothing's even come into us. All the plans will come to us by September 20th.
So you believe in your testimony today that the way the circumstances exist, that you would be given that flexibility to effectively work with a local establishment, local government, on that money, and that you, under the law, would be flexible enough to understand their individual needs?
Yes, sir.